Hey, good day, everybody. I'm Marty, also known as Raging Owlbear on social media, and today we're going to be talking about the Lord of the Rings role-playing game based upon the 5th edition mechanics, and it's essentially a port of a game called The One Ring into 5th edition. And The One Ring is a game that was written by Francesco Nepatello. It was actually originally published by Cubicle 7. Have the first edition was Cubicle 7 put this out. Francesco Nepatello wrote the first edition and the second edition. But Cubicle 7 lost the license, and so it went over to Free League. Free League, who are known for some of their other games, various other role-playing games, and so they put out a second edition. And then, going back to Cubicle 7, they had a 5th edition version of One Ring as well, called Adventures in Middle Earth. And so this was sort of the earlier iteration of the 5th edition of One Ring. Now, when they revised all of the One Ring for 2nd edition, which I also have here, when they did all the 2nd edition parts of One Ring and looked at revising that, of course, they said, well, let's revise sort of the 5th edition version, put it out with some of the changes that are reflected in the One Ring 2nd edition, and also revisit, what worked and what didn't work in the original 5th edition update. So let's talk a little bit about that. So, of course, the One Ring first edition and the original Adventures in Middle Earth actually take place about 5 years after Bilbo has returned from the Lonely Mountain from the death of Smaug. And so, and a lot of the focus on the first edition of the game was what is going on actually on the other side of Misty Mountains from the Shire, like Dale, Lake Town, Mirkwood, the various places along the Misty Mountains. Like the sort of focus of the first edition was what are all the things, what are the activities that are going on over there. And in the 2nd edition, they kind of brought it over back to the Western Lands, into Eriador, where the Shire is, and not that the first edition had no adventures in Eriador, but they decided to sort of bring the focus back to the West, and so the 2nd edition is about 10 years, roughly. The timelines are a little bit loosey-goosey, but roughly 10 years after the death of Smaug, rather than just 5 years. And so now, Bilbo is back in the Shire, has been there for a while, is working on his memoirs, and that is where sort of the introductory adventures for the game begin. There's a book called The Shire Adventures for the new Lord of the Rings role playing game, and which I don't have that book, but the One Ring starter set has basically the same adventures for the One Ring. But in any event, so the setting is a little bit different. They bring it again back across the Misty Mountains to Eriador, which of course has the Shire in it, has Bree, has the Grey Havens where the Linden elves live, and whatnot. So I'm going to talk a little bit about not just this particular 5th edition adaptation, but for those of you who may be familiar with Adventures in Middle Earth, the older 5th edition adaptation, talk a little bit about the differences, and of course how they both differ from Dungeons and Dragons as well, 5th edition, and then talk a little bit about also how they compare with the One Ring itself as well. So first, let's get into the basics. Just like in Dungeons and Dragons in 5th edition, you basically are picking to create a character. You're picking a race and a class. Except in the One Ring, they're actually called cultures and calling. And the interesting thing about cultures rather than races is it allows you a little bit more flexibility in terms of what makes that particular culture different from even a culture of the same species or race. So as an example, you have Bree humans, and then you have the men of Dale, Bardings, people who follow King Bard, and they may have different cultural values, and they may have different sort of perks they get as they level up, coming from that particular culture. The skills that they have gained are based essentially on their culture. And similarly, you could have elves of Linden, the ones who live at the Grey Havens and surrounding areas, and they're more sort of the, city elves. I don't, but basically they're living in. They're not living in Mirkwood. They're not living in the forests. They're Rivendell. They're not living in Rivendell. They're not living in. I can't remember the other. It'll come back to me. But basically, so because these are elves that are sort of living in an urban setting, they're going to have slightly different skills or different cultural touchstones than, say, the elves that have to sort of survive Mirkwood, who have their domain there. And so, you can create different cultures even with the same, elves, humans, dwarves. You have dwarves that live in the Iron Hills, and then dwarves that live in the Lonely Mountain, where, Thorin, where Smaug was killed and whatnot, where the new Dwarven Kingdom has been set up. So, depending upon where your character might come from, you might have slightly different cultural capabilities. So I thought that was a neat way to approach it and, give some differentiation between, what type of, again, whether you're an elf from this location or a dwarf from this location, how you might differ from other dwarves. So that's a little bit about the cultures, which are sort of the race of in terms of D&D statistics. And then you have the classes, which in the Lord of the Rings role-playing game are called callings. Now, the Lord of the Rings RPG is a low magic setting, so it doesn't have wizards. You can't play a Gandalf style character. Nobody's throwing around fireballs. Nobody's shooting lightning bolts out of their fingertips. Stuff like that. It's a low magic, everyday people kind of setting. Now, that doesn't mean that your characters aren't heroic, and they will gain certain capabilities as they level up, just like in D&D 5th edition. But the way the callings, the way these classes are written up, they make sure to sort of keep the flavor of the Lord of the Rings, keep the sort of the low magic flavor, making sure it doesn't feel too much like a D&D game, because it's supposed to be a much more challenging setting. I don't know what the right word is. It's not gritty in the same. It's not like a grim, dark gritty, but it is a more it's not as super heroic as D&D is. You again, you don't have people throwing around all kinds of magic spells. All your classes are basically melee classes for the most part. And I'll get into that actually. So what they did is they decided, how are we, really, because everybody is kind of a melee class, how are they going to differentiate, one sort of fighter type from another? And they actually did it in kind of an interesting way. I did find some sort of cool things about the way they did callings. The first thing is that, like, so again, they have your martial classes, your fighters, and one is the captain. And the captain class, he's not just a fighter; he's also a leader. So he might be a chieftain or a thane, or the whole idea is that that fighter class is based around leading your men and women, leading your group, your tribe, your whatever. But the whole idea is that the captain calling is for those characters that are in that sort of role of a leader of their sort of band. And then they have the more sort of standard fighter class, which is the champion. And the champion has two paths, an archery path, and just like a hardcore hand-to-hand combat class. And so to sort of make those more interesting, of course, the archer class path is pretty obvious. They get extra proficiency with bows and they do a little extra damage. And then the more they call the Slayer, the more sort of in your face melee class has some barbarian like attributes if you're compared to D&D, but it is still an armored individual. And then they have two kind of rogue paths. They have a messenger calling, and this person is supposed to be kind of like a little bit of a diplomat, a counselor, a herald, somebody who is traveling around because they are, basically meeting with important people and, going around and going to this king's court and this person's enclave, whatnot. So they are called the messenger, and from a mechanical standpoint, they're a little bit like rogues. They get sneak attack, they get uncanny dodge, but they also can fight unarmored because they're supposed to be, when they go to court or they go someplace, they're not going in as a warrior, they're going in as a diplomat. So they get some capabilities to, if they need to, they can wear armor, but if they need to be just wearing regular clothing, they have some, benefit in fighting unarmored. And then you have the more standard rogue, the treasure hunter calling, and that is more of the thief, the spy. Actually the two class paths are called spy and burglar. And so that's much more like the sort of standard Dungeons and Dragons rogue character or thief. And then, last but not least, there is a lore character who's kind of also a healer. So that because there's no magic to speak of in Lord of the Rings, you still need ways to kind of allow your characters to have some buffs and to get some healing during rests. And so you have this, you have the scholar, and the scholar is, again, they have all this lore. They know medicinal lore, but they also, are seekers of knowledge in terms of historical lore and stuff like that. So they're kind of like a lore bard with a little mix of, some medicine. I mean, not really. I wouldn't say cleric because it doesn't go that far. But the whole idea is that this is a person who seeks knowledge. So they have the capabilities. They understand what herbs and what special plants or what, how to make a poultice, so to speak, to help heal the wounds of their companions. And so that's what they did with the callings, the classes. Now, one thing that I thought was really weird in terms of choices that this book made from a mechanical standpoint. So again, it has the cultures and it has the callings, and and of course it has all the related capabilities that you get as you level up. But it has no real character generation rules in the sense that it doesn't tell you how to generate your attributes. There's nothing in here about rolling 3d6 or doing a point buy or doing standard array. The book just kind of makes the assumption, hey, you're coming from D&D, so you're going to bring that knowledge with you on or your game master, your DM, who's called the lore master in this book, is going to have their preferred character generation method. And so the book literally says nothing about it. I mean, it tells you about, like I said, picking your culture and picking your calling. And then it tells you what stuff you get as you level up. But it has absolutely nothing on rolling the dice or doing the point buy or picking a standard array for your scores and placing them into your attributes. And not only that, it doesn't have a chart that shows you, 12 is +1 and 14 is +2 and, like all the little bonuses. It uses all the same D&D 5th edition bonuses, but there's nothing in the book that has that chart. It doesn't have the chart of scores and what your attribute bonus is. It doesn't tell you how to roll for your attributes. So the designers made a conscious choice to be like, well, we're going to save page count. We're gonna assume that the consumer is coming from D&D and knows all that. Knows that a 12 is a +1 and a 14 is +2, and that each 2 steps in your attribute is another bonus. And the game also leans hard on exhaustion. You have fatigue that occurs during the game, and you could get levels of exhaustion. It doesn't have the exhaustion stuff in the book. It doesn't tell you, like, or maybe I missed that one, but it's basically making some heavy assumptions that you're gonna have the D&D books, you're gonna have played the D&D, and that you're coming from D&D, and so that you don't need to be taught how to make a character and what happens when you get exhausted. I found that very puzzling. I mean, I like a lot of what I read in here, but there are some design choices that they made that are kind of having me scratch my head. Like, why didn't they? Because, okay, yeah, probably most people who are going to be picking up this book are coming from 5th edition. That's probably a pretty high number, but it's not guaranteed. And it may be that the dungeon master, the lore master, has come from 5th edition, but he might be pulling in friends who are like, oh, hey, let's play this Lord of the Rings game. And they may not have played D&D. Or maybe they played D&D, an earlier version of D&D, but they haven't played 5th edition. And so it doesn't have everything they need in this book. You would need to go and look at your player's handbook, your D&D 5th edition player's handbook for some of the stuff. Now, again, they're small things, and if you've come from D&D 5th edition, you're going to know these things. But I find it really weird that they don't have everything you need in this book. I thought that was a very strange choice to make. So, all right. So I'm gonna set that aside for the moment, and let's talk about the other stuff that comes in it. So, again, it doesn't have any magic system, which is understandable because people like Gandalf or Radagast, Saruman, stuff like that. Those are the Maiar. Those are very powerful beings who have come down to Middle Earth from wherever the metaphorical heaven of Middle Earth. The powerful wizards have come from elsewhere, been sent to Middle Earth to sort of usher things along and help out the peoples, the free folk, as it were. And so you can't play one of those people because obviously there's only a few of them. There's the 2 blue wizards, which don't get named in the novels, but they exist. Those 2 blue wizards are in the lore. Again, Gandalf, Saruman, Radagast the Brown. I can't think if there's any others, but the wizards are not wandering the countryside. There's just a very few of them, and they serve a very particular role. Now, they do serve as NPCs in the game, and I'll talk about that a little bit because some of the things that this game emphasizes that D&D doesn't as much, or D&D has hand-waved a lot of it, is the idea that when you go on an adventure, you don't just go to a dungeon and explore it. A huge part of your going out into the world is taking the journey to get to where you're trying to go. So just like in The Hobbit, they have to travel all the way to the Lonely Mountain and get there in a certain amount of time to make sure that they are able to open the special lock and key. And of course in Lord of the Rings, they have to travel to Mount Doom. So the journey is a critical part of the adventure. It is the adventure. It's not just the destination and the thing you do at the destination. It's what you do along the way as well. And so there's a whole mechanic around doing journeys. So the whole idea is that when you get your adventure hook, you may have to go somewhere. You may have to travel many days or even weeks. And so they have this whole journey system where the players look at the map. The lore master is encouraged to give the players the map. And so the players can say, hey, we want to maybe follow this road, and then we have to go over here and stuff like that. It asks the players to say, plan your journey, say where you want to go and how you want to get there. And then, of course, the lore master on his side of the screen, so to speak, knows the difficulty of the terrain that they're having to travel through or how dangerous it is. So they just have the map. And so the player's just trying to look at the map and say, okay, what's the best way do we think to get to this location or whatever. But of course the lore master has the hexagonal, map key that shows, again, how difficult is the terrain there, how dangerous is the terrain there. And so they can then know how long is that journey going to take and roughly how many encounters are they going to have along the way. What events, and not just encounters, but events, it could be weather, it could be people, it could be orcs, it could be any number of things. So but basically there's several events that are going to occur. And of course, the more dangerous the territory is, the more dangerous the event might be. And so that is a core sort of mechanic of the game, is looking at the map and figuring out where you're going to go and what you're going to do, how you're going to get there, and then proceeding on your journey. And at the end of the journey, when you get to the destination, you have gotten fatigued along the way, and so it is actually possible to get exhaustion. You have to, based upon how much fatigue you've taken on, you have to make saving throws. And then if you fail those saving throws, you're so fatigued that you might accrue a level of exhaustion or more. And the One Ring has a similar mechanic, but because it's a sort of a 5th edition based, book, again, it leans upon mechanics that a D&D 5th edition player would already know. And so it uses the exhaustion mechanic, which I think is a neat way to do it. Of course, that also means that it can be very dangerous, because if you've taken on several levels of exhaustion, you're going to be at disadvantage. You have trouble with saving throws. You're going to, so there's, and so you have to find ways to sort of mitigate that fatigue. And there are some ways to do that within the character classes have certain, and again, they have certain capabilities that might allow you to get, whether it's a bonus on doing the fatigue saving throw, or you get some healing if you rest in the right place, etc. And that's the other sort of neat thing about this. Again, in D&D, in D&D, parties can basically just sleep wherever they are. They go to bed and they get fully healed and whatever, stuff like that. In the One Ring and in Lord of the Rings Roleplaying, the idea is you can sleep on the road, but you don't recover your capabilities. You're not really getting rested. You're not recovering. Your hit points are not recovering as many. You're not getting fully rested back. You're not curing exhaustion. Basically, in order to rest, to truly get a quote like a long rest or whatever, you have to be somewhere where it's safe, where you can sleep and you wouldn't have to put up a watch, like somewhere where that that you're not out in the wilderlands, you are at Rivendell, you are at the Prancing Pony and Bree, you're someplace where you can let your guard down and truly let your body recuperate, whether it's overnight or over the course of several days. So yeah, while you're out on the road, you don't get all your stuff back. You don't get you don't become fully recuperated just because you slept in a tent. It's much more like you're roughing it. So you're not going to be well rested. You're having to sleep in the cold and the weather and stuff like that. So, I really like that D&D really hand waves everything that's dangerous and vexing about overland travel. There are so many ways to sort of in standard Dungeons and Dragons that you don't, there's so much magic and there's so many class capabilities that, you don't have to worry about food anymore. You don't have to worry about getting tired. The traveling is very kind of boring and uneventful unless your dungeon master really works hard at it. And one of the nice things about the One Ring and Lord of the Rings role-playing is it very much centers that experience, the difficulty of traveling overland through wilderness where you don't have, civilization to rest at, and so, part of you, especially part of planning journeys of your trip, is to try to find those sanctuary places that you can rest up and recuperate. So again, if you're traveling from Shire, you might want to stop in Bree so you can stay at the Prancing Pony, and hopefully, if you have the right people in your party, you could, travel all the way to Rivendell and be able to rest there. But you may not be. You may have to go over the mountains, but the whole idea is that you have to plan your journey in such a way that your party doesn't become completely exhausted and worn out from the traveling when you get to the place that you need to go to do the thing that you need to do. And I really like that aspect of the game. So that's one thing that you could actually adapt into a D&D game. Difficulty being is that, again, with rangers and druids and background capabilities that D&D 5th edition has, overland travel again is really not very dangerous. So you might have to adjust your game a little bit, with your player, figure out some house rules with your players to sort of make that more interesting again. But it is definitely a really cool mechanic for like a low magic style campaign. The other thing that the Lord of the Rings has is the idea of a patron being someone who is a mentor to your adventuring group. So you might have somebody who's powerful, who is not really financing you, but in a way, giving you the resources that you need to go on these adventures and go on these journeys and fight the shadow and whatnot. And, and that it could be Gandalf, but it's also, there's a Linden elf, Sidrin, the shipwright, or something like that. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's this really ancient elf that lives in the Grey Havens, and you can get him as a patron, or you could use Balin, Balin from The Hobbit, who's a friend of Bilbo's, and he can become your patron. Or, again, there are a number of these powerful NPCs who, are sort of fighting evil, are, against the shadow, trying to keep the threat of orcs down or whatnot. And so the whole idea is that you can ally yourselves with these very powerful NPCs and get them as a patron. And that's that's definitely a mechanic, the same idea that you could bring into your Dungeons and Dragons game. about making your NPCs, making powerful NPCs more important in your game, and having them be sort of a patron, a sponsor of your adventuring parties. So that's a really neat mechanic that's not just cool for Lord of the Rings, but can be, again, easily introduced into other 5th edition style games. The other thing that it has is what's called Counsels. So when your party needs something and you're visiting a powerful leader, whether it's a king or a chieftain or whatever, a group of people that you need some support from, you need some favor from them. There's a whole system called Counsels, which is how do I convince them to give me what I need in order to help me, And it's actually a really neat mechanic because, it measures, well, how much of a sacrifice is it for them? And obviously, if it's a big sacrifice for them, it's harder to achieve. If it's a little sacrifice for them, then it's easier to achieve. And then it talks about, okay, well, how do you want to go about convincing them? And, so you ask your group, your players, what are the things that you want to do to try to convince them? And you might make a rousing speech, or you might try to talk to the king's court or other allies and get them on your side. And, there's lots of sort of role-playing possibilities. And then it does become kind of like a skill challenge. So, the player declares what the action they want to do to try to convince people, or to, maybe there's a political situation where you have political rivals and you want to play them off one another so that at least one of them is going to support you. So there's various different ideas of how you can approach these councils. And that's something, again, that can be brought into your 5th edition game. There's patrons, there's councils, there's journeys, and then of course there's also being the theme of Lord of the Rings and the rise of shadow. There's what are called shadow points. So again, as you journey and you suffer fatigue or hopelessness, or you do something that is, evil. This is kind of like an alignment. There's no real alignment in Lord of the Rings. You're a good guy. But yeah, as if you do some things that are shady, you will get these shadow points. And if you get too many of these shadow points, you have what's called a madness, which basically you and your game master, your lore master, sort of figure out what your character does that is like, underhanded or maybe a little crazy, or, you might fly into a rage, you might betray a friend, you might, there's like lots of different options in the book. It's kind of a neat mechanic, but the whole idea is that you want to role play out the idea that you've been bogged down by sort of the growing evil, and then that has affected you mentally, and maybe you're turning a little bit mad, or you've got a lot of rage in you, or you've got a lot of depression, or whatever. But the point is that you're gonna do, because you've gathered all this sort of negative energy into you, you're then going to act out in a way that is like use your character flaws, like if you're greedy, or if you're more violent or whatever. But it's kind of a neat mechanic to add more sort of role playing, and again, it's not an alignment system, but it is a way of, the whole idea is that you don't want to get shadow points. You want to try to be righteous. You want to try to do the right thing ethically and morally, or else, you're going to accumulate these points and something bad will happen to you down the line. So that's another like kind of cool mechanic. So real quickly, looking back at something like Adventures of Middle. So for those of you who have Adventures in Middle Earth or are familiar with the system, how different is it? So here's one of the things that I thought a really good adjustment they did is that in Adventures in Middle Earth, they still did a lot of things very D&D like. They created these classes that go for 20 levels. They get a lot of powers and capabilities, especially as they level up. And at a certain point, the characters are almost too powerful for the Lord of the Rings style setting. You know, you know, a 20th level character is super powerful. Even taking the fact that there's low magic and there's not the same amount of healing or stuff like that. You know, 20 levels in Adventure in Middle Earth, that's a lot of capabilities that your character is going to get. You have a lot of hit points. You're pretty powerful. So when they redesigned for the new version, they capped it at level 10, which I think makes a huge amount of sense for the power level and the play style. You know, to put that level cap. So, you know, again, you still get some neat, you know, capabilities as you level up, but level 10, you know, you're done, you're retired. I mean, it does have some like rules to say, oh, if you want to play beyond level 10, here's what you can do. And so it gives you some ideas of, but basically it caps all the classes at level 10 to try to hold on to that sort of low power theme. You know, that it's not a super heroic game. You know, unlike D&D, which gets, you know, where the power curve gets really, really big, especially as the players approach 10th level, 12th level, you know, and higher. You know, that power curve is just kind of crazy. And so I like the idea that they redesign the classes to be capped at 10th level to sort of keep the theme, the thematic low power nature of the Middle Earth. So that was kind of a nice thing. One of the other sort of strange things that they did not do, which I was surprised about, is they kept the 5th edition skill system pretty much as it is, but added a couple new skills that are in the One Ring. And I thought that was a strange choice because if I were designing it, because the One Ring has a similar skill tree or skill like abilities that 5th edition does, but they're just tweaked slightly, you know. In 5th edition, everything's sort of like grouped into survival, whether it's hunting or tracking or, you know, finding things, and the One Ring sort of separates those pieces out. You know, you have a hunting skill, you have a travel skill. You know, you have sort of more discrete, smaller skills rather than a skill that's sort of a catch-all. And they could have done the same thing in the Lord of the Rings role-playing game. Even in 5th edition, just change the skills, change the skill names, and change the nature of them slightly to be more like the One Ring rather than like D&D 5th edition. Now, they did take a couple of the skills from the One Ring and add them in, but I thought it was a weird choice the way they did that. Because again, they did add a hunting skill, they did add a travel skill, and then they added the riddle skill. Now, in the One Ring, the riddle skill is not just about, like, are you good at riddles? It's also about how good are you at double talk. So it kind of serves as a deception skill. It serves a little bit like an insight skill because you can use your riddle ability to try to guess whether the person is, you know, trying to fool you. So it is like a little bit like deception, insight, and also, you know, telling riddles as well. But they tried to make it, you know, very thematic for Lord of the Rings. And again, you know, you don't have a survival skill. You have the hunting, you have travel, you have stuff like that. So instead of like revamping all the skills in 5th edition, like doing them more like the One Ring, they just have all the 5th edition skills, and then they added riddle, hunting, travel, which are redundant to the 5th edition skills, I think, because you already have like a deception. You already have those charisma skills in 5th edition. You know, you have a survival skill in 5th edition. Actually, let me double check the character sheet to see. Maybe they did pull out survival, but I don't think they did. But I thought it was a weird choice. Like I probably would have just, you know, done a new skill list, you know, and it wouldn't need a tremendous change. Okay, so it does look like they did pull out survival. Okay, so that makes sense now, because now they have the travel skill, the hunting skill. So but yeah, they still have deception, and They did take out insight. There is no insight skill. Oh no, it's there. I'm sorry. So they do have a deception and insight. And again, the riddle skill sort of replaces those things in the One Ring. Then so there's a little bit of redundancy there. I don't know. Maybe that's not that big a deal, but I think it would have been easy enough to take the skills that are in the One Ring and just sort of adapt them to the stats that are in strength and intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, charisma, etc. They could have very easily just overlaid the skills that are in the One Ring on top of the sort of the framework of D&D 5th edition. But instead, they just used the D&D 5th edition skills and then added a couple more. Okay, yeah, I guess that's fine. It was a design choice, and it probably works fine. But again, I think the weird thing that for me was that they didn't add some of those things, some of those mechanics that they rely on from 5th edition. They didn't put in the book because they assume that you are going to be coming from 5th edition and those mechanics already. So I was surprised that they didn't have a character generation method, and they didn't have, again, all the rules on exhaustion in the book. They basically assume that the rules for exhaustion, and so they wrote out their mechanics based upon you already knowing these things. So yeah, so I mean that's the Lord of the Rings role playing in a nutshell. Is it a buy? If you really want to play a 5th edition version of Middle-earth, I think this is a really good resource. It's a good game. Again, I find it odd, the things that they didn't do in the book, but if you're coming from 5th edition, you're not, maybe that won't matter to you, because you already know how to do these things. For my money, I think I like the One Ring a little better. It's just mechanically it fits the theme of the Lord of the Rings just slightly better. I mean, they're very similar, but the One Ring is more like you don't have classes. You when you gain experience, you spend them into your skills. So it's more like a skill based system. So you're not gaining capabilities based upon a class or a calling, as it were. You're just getting different skill points that you can spend into different things. So from that standpoint, I like the flexibility. I like the flexibility of the character creation and leveling of the One Ring, as opposed to the more standard sort of class-based system of a 5th edition, D&D 5th edition style game. Does that mean I wouldn't play this if one of my buddies is like, oh, let's play, the Lord of the Rings 5e? No, absolutely, I'd play it. I obviously enjoy the setting. I have both books. Clearly, I purchased both books, and I purchased the Cubicle 7 version of, Adventures in Middle-earth as well, and the original One Ring 1st edition. So I'm pretty much all in. Again, the new version is by Free League, who has, several of the new, like they have the Aliens RPG and several other recognizable IPs. But so it's a good book. If you want to play a 5th edition version of Middle-earth, absolutely. But if you are not intimidated by picking up a new system, the Lord of the Rings, actually the One Ring, the starter box set is right behind me here, which has the Shire based adventures where you play a group of hobbits, and Bilbo gets involved. Those are the introductory adventures to teach you the rule. So the One Ring box set, I really like it. The One Ring hardback as well, I think is great. Yeah, I would say it's your call whether if you really are digging the idea of having a fifth edition version of it, absolutely go get it. Oh yeah, one of the things I forgot is it does come with some cool maps. The book has a map insert in the back, and so it has Eriador, this beautiful fold out paper map of Eriador, and then on the reverse is this amazing map of the Shire. I mean, the Shire map is absolutely stunning. So and of course that comes in the box set for the One Ring. It's not in the hardback. And so the map comes with the hardback in the Lord of the Rings 5e version, but the map is in the box set for the One Ring. So it's the same fold out paper map. And it's a beautiful map. So interestingly enough, that map is not in the PDF for the 5th edition version. It is in the PDF if you purchase the One Ring. It comes with the PDFs there. It does not come with the PDFs if you buy the 5e, which I thought was odd, but whatever. Maybe it comes with the other adventure. Maybe it comes with the Shire Adventures hardback. I don't know. And they are putting out. They actually just put out or is up for pre-order some new adventures for the 5e version as well. So absolutely, I'd say either of these, whether you want to try a new system, I absolutely think the One Ring is a great system. It's it oozes the theme and the feel of the Middle Earth genre. But again, the 5th edition Lord of the Rings role playing game is excellent as well. So thank you all. I've been Marty, also known as Raging Owlbear on social media. I have my blog, ragingowlbear.blogspot.com. Hopefully I'm going to update it even more often than I have been, because I haven't been updating it very often these days. But please subscribe, throw me a bone to help me with the visibility of these videos, and that would be great. I hope you enjoyed me going through the review, and yeah, it's a good book. So check it out or buy the One Ring. You can't go wrong, honestly, with either of them. Playing in the Lord of the Rings genre is a lot of fun. So thank you again. I've been Marty, Raging Owlbear, and I'll see you around.